Hello and welcome to another episode of Metal Effort. My name's Nehemiah, and today we're going to be looking at this piece of metal, the Rick Hinderer half track. Now, this is on loan from Nick Shabazz again. He's been loading me a lot of knife, guys, and it's very helpful. Thank you, Nick. I don't think this one was supplied to Nick, so I don't think we have to assume that this was necessarily cherry-picked or anything for him to review. I think this is just a run-of-the-mill half track as far as I'm aware. Nick, correct me in the comments otherwise. Let's do some size comparison. I've got the Stalwarts, the PM2, and the Para 3 here. So, pretty small knife in terms of blade length. It's, I don't know, half the track that's a full track. So, it's a small knife, but kind of a big knife at the same time. And, I kind of want to show some more size comparison so you can kind of get a feel for the knife. Here's the Spidey Chef. Here's the Wee Knives Deacon. So in terms of blade length, it's pretty short. It's not a very long blade at all. But when we turn these knives sideways, you get kind of an idea. The Deacon is kind of a thick knife as far as small knives go. But then you compare it to something like the Spidey Chef, and it makes these two knives look quite a bit, I am having a hard time here, quite a bit thicker in comparison. So this is a chubby bunny in terms of thickness. I'm not necessarily saying that's strictly bad. It's just, not a usual dimension for a knife to have. Be so short this way, but so thick this way. You gotta know what you're getting into for sure. Blade length wise, we're looking at about 2.5 inches of cutting, maybe a little bit more, and 2 3/4 to the shoulder there. Let's get a quick weigh in. We're clocking in at 4.2 ounces for a 2 3/4 blade. That is not the best ratio, obviously. Just for comparison's sake, we'll throw the full track on there just so you know what you're saving. This is 7 ounces, so it's not quite doubling in weight, but that's not that far off. Now let's get into our dent, the decent, the excellent, the nitpicks, and the terrible of this piece of metal. First off, in the decent, I kind of like the beefiness of the knife. I think the closest thing that I've really experienced to this is maybe a busker, where, it's pretty short, but not exactly the most slim knife. This is definitely a lot beefier than that, no doubt about it. So it's kind of like a big small knife, or a small big knife. I think a small big knife is probably a better way to put it. And going into this, I didn't think I was going to like this knife that much, but I think I warmed up to it a little bit. And one of the aspects of that I warmed up to is just the size of the knife. It's comfortable. I can get my grip on there, no problem. But it is just like a little miniature bank vault in your hand. It gives you a sense of quality, satisfaction. Obviously we don't want to be too biased in the whole weight must mean quality, but I think here it gives off that first impression, and I think it does see it through with actual quality. So overall, that sensation, I think, is a valid one to have, and it's definitely apparent on this one. In terms of blade steel, they're definitely using some premium parts here. 20 CV on this and the full track that I have. I have noticed a couple vendors are carrying them in M390, so if they're not going to use this steel, it seems like they're pretty stuck on using very good quality steel, and that's analogous to 20 CV. So I have seen a couple like custom exclusive ones that were in S35EN. So that's also out there in the wilds, but I think the vast majority of them are going to be 20 CV, which is very good. Speaking of steel type options, there's also a lot of different blade type options, blade shape. So you've got like the Spanto type one that we have here. You have a Tonto. There's a clip point that's recently come out. So, as far as personal preference on blade shape goes, I think they pretty much have you covered. They don't have like a Warncliffe or anything like that, as far as I'm aware, at least not yet. But definitely some variety to pick from, which is nice. I like having options and, kind of covers some of the subjective differences that we have in just our personal preference. The jimping on the knife is pretty effective in terms of like grabbing. It looks a lot more rounded than it is. It's actually pretty sharp. Not like in a bad way. It's just, just looking at pictures, it kind of looks like it's big, rounded jimping, but it actually does a pretty good job of giving you some traction. Same is true for the jimping on the back of the knife here. So I think that's good. I like that. The one place where there isn't jimping is on the flipper tab, but I don't think that's an issue. The shape of the flipper tab is actually really, really good. It gives you plenty of purchase. I have not slipped off of this flipper tab one time. It's very easy to get a lot of power and torque without having to like hunt and peck for the perfect placement of your finger. It goes exactly where you would naturally want it to go, and it works really well. The flipper tab does. Not having jimping on there, I think, probably helps the pocket pecker aspect of it. Having this like little thumb hammock thing where it's kind of sunk it in, I think how much is actually like pecking at stuff is a lot less than it looks like at first glance. And so I'm pretty pleased with the flipper tab. I don't think there's much about it that I would change. In general, G10 isn't like the most exotic or interesting material, but I think it's hard to deny that G10 is extremely practical in terms of how lightweight and tough it is, the texture of it that you can get out of it. And they did a really good job on the texture on this, and it does give you a lot of traction for sure. I think it's, reasonably attractive. It kind of got this wavy diamond pattern on there. Cutout is pretty good for, your index finger to rest and for you to get access to the lock bar. So I'm pretty pleased with the G10. I kind of wish this was carbon fiber with the price range that we're in, but I don't know how much that would kind of, change the look or the feel of the knife and maybe go against what, Rick Hinderer was going for. But, as G10 goes, this is good G10. So there you go. This is kind of a silly one, but I really like the screws. So kind of the bolt-like, giant collar aspect of these does give it some interesting kind of rivet type look while still being actual screws, obviously. Giant, Shirogorov like screw, there goes all the way through as opposed to stopping on one side. Very reminiscent of a Shirogorov, kind of just stick a coin in there and you can tighten your pivot if you need to. One thing I like to point out is just the fit and finish on this knife. It's pretty much perfect. I mean, in terms of centering, I think it's exactly perfect. Everything matches up. You have like the lines, the grooves that are cut into both the titanium and the G10 is perfectly aligned and done correctly. No gaps or anything really to be worried about. Really good job on the fit and finish here. I couldn't find like a flaw in terms of fit and finish on the sucker. So that's good. I mean, it's something you would expect out of a knife this expensive, but still, I'm going to point it out when it's there. Last decent thing I want to talk about, and this is probably the most subjective thing, but I just think it kind of looks cool. I don't know. I usually don't like to just blatantly say, that looks good. But there's something about this design, kind of a angular retro / future look of, a big beefy burly knife, designed to do work. And I think this definitely puts off that impression. It's something that's, kind of fresh and new. We're not used to this particular shape of, kind of the angled off back end and just kind of what's going on here. I think it's definitely the silhouette of this knife is something that's going to be easily recognizable and very distinct in the knife community. And I can see why. It definitely kind of catches the eye without being like too loud. Next, we're going to move into the excellent section, and I have two excellent things to talk about. First is the tri-way pivot system that's installed on this knife, which is indicated by that little alien crop circle type thing right there. So in the knife, you can do bearings, you could do Teflon washers, or you can do phosphor bronze washers. And there's like a little like washer type thing that you put in there in order to have the washers be flat up against that, and you take them out if you're going to put the bearing system in. Very clever system, and it works incredibly well. We'll talk about kind of the payoff of this, but in a very practical sense, it's just giving you options. You buy the knife with the blade shape that you want, you get the color configuration you want, which there are plenty of colors. But in terms of your preference on the pivot, that's also something you get to choose at any moment, maybe switch back and forth. If it's gonna be like your little beefy office ninja, cutting open envelopes and stuff, you probably want to have your bearings in there because sawdust or whatever isn't getting stuck in there. But if you're gonna be out in nature, or you got a rough and tumble job, throw in some washers in there that won't get all gunky and dirty in there. So being able to switch between those two, or just pick your favorite and leave it in all the time, I think that's really good. Giving us options without making the overall experience of the knife worse. If this didn't work, if it was something like, oh yeah, the bearings is fine, but if you put the washers in, they move around and you get blade play or something like that, that's not the issue. But if it was, then it'd be good for trying, but you made the knife overall worse because there's this like critical flaw, and that's not what we're seeing here. And so the fact that you're getting like a strictly better experience of having options and having those washers and bearings perform the way that you would expect them to perform is really admirable. The next thing I want to talk about in the excellence section is related, which is the action on this knife. So I'm going to be judging this in terms of bearings, because I'm definitely the fidgeter. I'm not the rough and tumble guy. Just my job and my lifestyle, that's not something I'm doing right now. And so for me, I prefer the fidget factor of opening the knife, closing the knife, and that whole thing. And I think the bearings is definitely better for that. And the action is fantastic. The detent on the knife is dialed in. So again, with that flipper tab, I'm getting good purchase. As soon as it breaks that detent, boom, it rockets out every time. I mean, it's really, 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 really powerful. The only one little quibble I would say is that the knife is so small. There's times where when you're grabbing it, you kind of have your finger down here in the way. So when you go to fire it, sometimes it'll bump into your finger, which is kind of dumb of me, but it's definitely something possible that you can't really tell exactly all the time where that finger is. And you do want to get some kind of traction down here at the bottom of the knife. And so you can kind of get your fingers in the wrong spot sometimes, but not a huge issue. The action itself is awesome. As far as my trifecta of action, you have the open, and I decided I'm going to call it OCD. Open, close, disengage. It's not in the right order, which is going to make people who are OCD really angry. But if you're OCD, you really should call it CDO, because that's alphabetical. So nothing's perfect. Disengage on this knife is great. It's very easy access. You have the cutout here, like I mentioned on the G10, but you also have some heavy kind of internal milling or whatever you want to call that. So it's very wide and easy for your finger to get in here and move that lock bar over. This is very easy. Zero lock stick, great lockup otherwise, but super fast and easy. It doesn't feel the half stop. As soon as I disengage it, pretty much right away, that ball's on the tang of the blade, the detent ball. So it's one jostle, shuts amazingly well. So final thing is the close, one jostle, really smooth. I mean, this is great. Just such a small knife with such awesome action is really, really, really cool. I definitely like the OCD of this knife. Knife doesn't come without its nitpicks, and so we'll move into those. First thing, I don't like this arbitrary, it seems arbitrary to me, how the jimping is on this thumb resting spot, and it's just high. It's really high. They're making room for this giant fuller. And so what happens is your thumb, if you're doing the pinch, placement, this is your little hammock for your thumb. But then you kind of, you kind of shortchange yourself in terms of getting your pinky to live on the knife. So it doesn't feel comfortable or locked in when you have this grip at all. And I don't think it was really designed for that. So obviously you put your thumb up here, but now your thumb feels awkwardly high and forward. And so it just, like, I don't know, I want my thumb here, I think, and I want it to be like a 1/4 of an inch lower, I think is the natural place. I should be here, but instead I'm up here, here to here, and it's a little awkward. It's a little bit awkward. I have medium-sized hands. This is going to be totally subjective, but this is just, it's my call as far as how I feel about it, and you might be in a similar situation to me of like, oh, how do I put my thumb here? Where does it belong? It kind of feels like it's in the foster care system and it doesn't know where it's supposed to belong to. Second nitpick is this aforementioned fuller. Now, I don't know what this is for. I'm pretty sure it's not like an actual blood groove. I mean, you have to get pretty deep in there for blood to start flowing out of that. So, maybe it's to help you open. If you want to be like stealthy and like do a pinch thing. The problem is the D10 is so strong and this fuller is so close to the pivot, I don't have a lot of leverage. If the fuller was up here, I think the leverage would be fine, but I'm pinching very hard and I cannot open up the knife with that fuller. I mean, I'm not on the lock bar for tension. And this is useless in terms of opening. So I don't think that's what it's for. But it's really annoying because it's the thing that's making this thumb rest so high. And otherwise doesn't give me any kind of like practical purpose that I can find. Please put in the comments like, what is this for? And are you as annoyed as much as I am that it's there? Next nitpick, I'm not a huge fan of the clip. And the clip isn't terrible in and of itself, but it's just the wrong clip on the wrong knife. It's the identical clip that's on the full track. I mean, they are exactly the same. So it's just kind of a weird contact point. Contact points like closer to that end of the knife than this end of the knife. It's really shallow carry, and you've got like 3 bolts sticking out of your pocket. So I'm not really passing this one off as a pen in my pocket. It's kind of pokey. It points up right here. I mean, it's not super sharp, but it's definitely kind of annoying. I don't think it's too much of a problem when you're holding it because it's so far down. It's not like even touching me. But in terms of like, getting into your pocket and this rubbing up against whatever you're leaning on, if you're brushing up against the table or something, this is just like gouging into the table or a wall. I'm just not really excited about this. It's not reversible. Everything is, right hand tip up only. So like the ability to screw it in, the design philosophy of this is kind of saying, oh yeah, you can plug me in anywhere on other older Hinderer knives, I'm guessing. But they move the same clip over to this knife where you can't move it. So that's like too prominent. Like, can it be a little bit more deep carry and just not be so big and look like this or feel like this? This is like a 4 out of 10 on clips. So I'm just not a huge fan of it. I think it's worse on the half track than it is on the full track. We'll talk about that in the full track review, but I think it's more egregious on the half track for sure. Next nitpick, and this is not a terrible thing. It's just not the best cutter. I mean, you're looking at like, let's get some objective numbers here. Yeah, 0.165. It's a fatty one. I mean, this is like, what's the PM2? PM2 is thinner. PM2 is thinner than the half track. And so, cutting into like food prep, if you're in the office, you're trying to cut through an apple or something, it's going to feel like you have to baton it. I did cut up some onions with this. It was not fun. It It was okay. It's not long enough to like get through everything, and it's just so thick, and then there's a bunch of gunk in there. It cuts. I mean, you can get it sharp. It's not like a completely useless tool, but it's definitely not the greatest cutter or slicer. Sorry to break it to you. Second to last nitpick is the weight. Weight on this is obviously pretty egregious. If you look here into the insides of the scales, there's no milling. This is just solid chunk of titanium. They didn't even try. I felt like, if you just did a little bit of internal milling, maybe get this under the 4 ounce mark, I think that would do a little bit better to our like perceived, weight of the knife overall. It feels so dense that I could definitely feel it in my pocket. And because it's so short of a knife, your pocket is like top heavy. If you got this much pocket down here, it's just so heavy up here. It just feels weird. I will say it's pretty easy to like put stuff in your pocket and it's just jingling around down here. It's not like this is in the way. It's not bad. It carries fine. It's just the weight of it that kind of feels a little off. Last nitpick is just another subjective thing. I just wish this knife was a 3/4 track, because it has so many things going for it, and this just feels a little too small to be like, super practical as a small knife. Usually when you're going small, you need, good weights. You're just trying to get under legal laws. So, this, I don't know, it's not really being too compelling. It's like, if you want a full track, but you absolutely can't, then here's the half track. And it's like, okay, yes, it's good, but it could have been better. It could have been like actually designed for a purpose outside of just like being a small version of a big knife. And I think the 3/4, I should say, half track would be full. No, see, it's so hard. 3/4 track. That would be a good size kind of trade-off. I think when you look at the two knives, like this is 7 freaking ounces and this is 4 and some change. Like this looks gigantic. This looks awkwardly small and big. 3/4 track should be right here, and it would be really compelling to me personally. So I don't know if that's, something you align with me on or not. I mean, this is, again, a very subjective thing to end my nitpicks on, but still, it's my opinion. Suck it. Last thing in the terrible section is the value or lack thereof. This is like the cheapest version of a half track. You can get different versions that go up to like $600 and exclusive models and different colors and blah 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 blah. But the going rate is $425 for this knife, and I don't know, man. This is kind of similar to the Sebenza, the small Sebenza review I did, which was my first knife review a long time ago, 6 months ago, over that. And it's kind of the similar thing. I think everybody has just gotten used to paying this much for Sebenzas and Hinderers. They've been around so long. There's so much brand recognition. I think you're paying like an extra $100 more than you should if we didn't know who made this, or if it was like a mysterious, knife maker and it was the exact same knife. There's no way that they could charge $425 for this knife. I know there's going to be people that searched for this half-track review, and you're probably a huge fan of Hinderer and his knives, and maybe the full track and the half-track. I'm just telling you, before you go crazy of saying that I'm, disrespecting a knife maker that's been around before I was anybody, I just want you to really think about this. And this is one of the better knives, I think, coming out of Hinderer in a long time. Is this knife worth $425? When you're looking at what We Knives is doing, what Spyderco is doing, I mean, shoot, you got the Paisan coming out here soon for like $520. That's like 90%, if not 95%, of a $1,500 knife. That actually earns its $1,500. This is not, I mean, G10, there's not that much material. It's not, I don't know. 325, I think I could swallow that pill. 425, I'm actively in the no recommendation, unless you're like crazy Rick Hinderer fan and that's just what you want. You're collecting all the knives. Gotta catch them all. Let's move into the conclusion. The conclusion is I really like this knife. I do. More than I thought I was going to. You know, I heard Nick was like, I actually like the half track a lot. Even though it's not really his kind of knife either. And I was like, yeah, sure. I mean, it's well done, like good fit and finish, and it's solid. It is what it's trying to be. Okay, fine. But I didn't think I was going to personally like it. I think, I'm such a stickler on action, and this does have such fantastic action. And there's something to be said of filling the hole of a small big knife. I don't have very many small big knives in my collection. And so when I want to pretend to have a big hefty knife, but I can't or don't want to really take a big hefty knife to work or somewhere, then I get to pretend that I'm, a mall ninja or a supermarket ninja or wherever I'm going that day. If I have this in my pocket, I'm like, oh yeah, beefy. It is more psychological than anything. It is nice. I get it. I get why people like this. But if I'm, doing reviews, I'm forcing myself to be objective. And I think even though I'm surprised at how much I like this knife, I don't think I can recommend it because of that price. So, at the end of the day, my official recommendation doesn't really matter that much. What's important to you? If action is something that's important to you, and form, the size of it, the weight of it, how well it cuts isn't as important to you, then, this is a good little fidget toy. I like it in that regard. It's kind of expensive to spend that kind of money just on a fidget toy. So, yeah, I'm kind of hot and cold on this knife, but it's definitely well done. I hope this was helpful to you. I will be doing a full track review here in the future, so you can kind of compare and contrast if you're trying to figure out which one you want to buy. I'll see you in the next one. Have a good one. Is really admirable.